Welcome to Carefree and Conscious, paranormal and profound authors with stunning true stories. If you like this type of content, be sure to subscribe. I'm your host, Susanne Wilson, the Carefree Medium and Intuition Educator. Today on Carefree and Conscious, Evolutionary Mediumship from Blindfold Billet to AI Mediumship Grows with Mark Ireland. Mark is the author of Soul Shift, Finding Where the Dead Go, and The Persistence of the Soul. These are deeply moving accounts of his journey, seeking answers after the physical death of his youngest son, Brandon Ireland. Mark is also the son of a renowned mid-20th century psychic medium, Richard Ireland, who, when very securely blindfolded, could do such things as know the serial numbers off of a dollar bill from someone across the room. That and much more. He has participated in assisting with mediumship research studies at the University of Arizona and the University of Virginia. He also is a co-founder and chairman of the board for Helping Parents Heal, an organization with nearly 40,000 members to date. This organization assists parents who have a physical separation with their children who are now in spirit and knowing that their relationships can continue in a different way. Mark has some thoughts on where mediumship is headed. We know that evidential mediumship basically consists of identifying the soul, giving evidence that it's really them and the message they came to say. But new things are entering the picture, such as artificial intelligence. I think you'll find this discussion intriguing. And now, Carefree and Conscious, Evolutionary Mediumship with Mark Ireland. Mark Ireland, welcome to Carefree and Conscious.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
I'm happy you're here. We have about 15 years of history, most of it passing through a group that you're the chairman of the board called Helping Parents Heal. We were brought together by Spirit, and you have such an amazing story of growing up with a world-renowned psychic and intuitive in your own house, and you're intuitive in your own right. I don't even know where to start, Mark. Where do you want to start? There's so much here.
Well, as my father would say, I was born when I was very small. No.
That the Richard Ireland humor, trademark
Yeah.
humor. Let's hear about your dad from your point of view.
Well, growing up in a house with a father who had psychic abilities and is also a medium is interesting. In some ways, it was a little confining because he would sniff out things that you weren't supposed to be doing and kind of put a halt to those. It was tougher on my brother, who was almost 10 years older, because when he was a teenager, that's when he was in like the main swing of things that he wasn't supposed to be doing. And then my parents split when I was like 11 or 12. So I didn't really have to endure that during my teen years. You know, just knowing like my brother had somebody buying him beer when he was underage and, drag racing his car and things like this, putting a stop to those. But just dad always knew, what was going on around the house or what you were involved with. So you just had to be mindful of that. But I was really proud of him too, because I saw how he touched other people's lives. He had his own church, actually, a very progressive type of a church called the University of Life. And that's where he would demonstrate the mediumship and the psychic phenomena both, because he both felt those were gifts of the spirit. But then he, went into the secular world too, and was on television and nightclubs and all kinds of venues. He always said, like, well, I have to go where the people are that would never set foot in a church, so they can see something that might stir them to consider there's more to us than just a physical body and a brain. And that's what he did. So the phenomena that he demonstrated was just so broad and so compelling. It's hard to explain it all. I think his signature phenomena was called Blindfold Billet, and so he would tape his eyes shut with 10 strips of Johnson Johnson medical tape. Cover his eyes with those, and then three black opaque blindfolds, and then more tape over that down below his eyes so no one could accuse him of peeking, and even under his nose, claiming some woman had once accusing of having his holes bored between his eyes and his nose so he could see out of his nostrils, which was rather ridiculous. But anyhow, with all that on, people would write questions on pieces of paper, send them up, and then he would answer them and go way off what was on the paper in a lot more detail, give first and last names and all kinds of things. I think one of my favorite stories involves my wife when I first met her. It was our second date, and I asked her what she wanted to do. I was like 19 years old and I was unprepared. So I just kind of showed up. Do you want to do, you want to go to a disco tonight? You want to go out to dinner? You want to go to see my dad's demonstration? And she goes, oh, let's do that. So we go there. We show up late because I'm running late as usual. And I encourage her to write a question. My dad's already taped a blindfolded and giving messages at this time. So I said, well, write a question. And she goes, well, what should I write? And I said, just anything comes to mind, maybe something about the future, because he was very precognitive as well. And so she wrote the question, will my mother ever get married? Because her mom was single at the time and was dating a guy, but she was pretty non-committal. So she had that sent up, and in a short period of time, my dad grabbed her paper and said, Susie Sap Soup Sap. It was Susie Sipe at the time. And he says, well, I think you've asked me a question about your mother, and if she's going to get married. Well, I don't know about your mother, my dear, but you have made your choice of man, and he's with you tonight. And so I spoke up and said, Dad, this is Mark. Susie's my date. And he says, oh my gosh, I just married off my own son. So
I love hearing that story. And is that also in your book, Soul Shift?
it is. It is.
Very
Yeah.
good. There's a lot of great stories and a lot of things that people can relate to also. And one of those is grief, most specifically the separation of father and son. And so your amazing son, Brandon, lives on the other side of life, and he's working with you from there to help a lot of people heal themselves and go through a grief journey. Did Brandon and Richard get to spend much time together?
Not a lot, but there were a couple of occasions where I saw my father look at Brandon and say something in a way that caught my attention. It just felt like my dad knew something more about Brandon at a deeper level than I'm like, what was that all about? And then after he passed, I realized, my dad probably knew that was going to happen, but he never would have told me because what was I going to do about it? And I'd spend
Yeah.
all those years worried and if he knew it was part of a plan that was inevitable, why would he share that? My dad would he would never tell, like, if he knew someone had cancer, for example, but it was incurable, he wouldn't say anything because he knew it was, nothing that could be done. But if he thought somebody could catch something early enough to make a change, then he would mention that kind of a thing. But yeah, and I think a little off the question here, but I saw growing up, that mediumship, and that was my favorite thing, really, because he would give psychic messages, but then he would come through and say, "Oh, I have your uncle, John here," and then give a bunch of detailed information that made clear who that was. And so I thought, wow, there really is more. This we do go on, even though I couldn't comprehend exactly how that works. I knew. So when the day came that my son Brandon passed, that gave me more confidence and hope than anything. Just remembering that, back from my younger days.
And I want to talk more about Brandon in just a moment, but something I want to share with you, I don't know if I've ever told you, but a few years ago, I had mentioned something about one of your books to a student, and she said, oh, you know Richard Ireland's son? I said, yes, I do know him. And she said, when I was a rowdy teenager, my dad had a reading with Richard, and he said, oh, by the way, your daughter's going to be extraordinarily spiritual later than life. And my dad turned to him and said, you don't know my daughter. And here she is at one of my workshops and a great intuitive student. And so your dad is picking up on life themes. He's picking up on mediumship. That extraordinary thing, like you said, that really got a lot of people's attention and put him in a major media spotlight is called Blindfold Billet. For our listeners, it's spelled Billet. And he would be so well taped up and blindfolded, as Mark just described. But he'd go on the Steve Allen show, for one. And I remember my granddad, I was a little girl. My granddad was sitting in his chair, and I was lying on the floor. We're watching TV, and this guy comes on and he's reading the serial numbers in his mind's eye of a dollar bill of somebody in the audience. And I remembered that. And so when I finally met you, I just couldn't believe it was like coming full circle. So,
No
well,
coincidence there, huh?
right, exactly.
Can I just expand on that dollar bill thing real
Yes,
quick?
please,
So
please do.
there's a man named Tony DePrima. He was my dad's attorney, and Tony's now in his 80s, but he's still hanging in there. He lives in Phoenix. Great guy. But he, back in 1967, he and some partners owned a restaurant with a stage and a lounge and everything. And so they hired my dad to do demonstrations there as entertainment. And Tony, at first, he was skeptical. So he and his, I don't know if he just did it himself, but his partners, and he took a $20 bill, wrapped it in foil, put that inside of a sealed envelope, and said, "Give me the serial number on the bill without opening this." And he did that on three different occasions, and it was successful. My dad successfully gave him the serial number. That was just a common thing, but to have those extra measures in place was pretty interesting. And they weren't skeptics after that.
I imagine not. Let's talk a little bit about Brandon. We'll lead up to how you and I met, how
Mhm.
Helping Parents Heal got started in the first place. Brandon was a really special guy, huh?
Yeah, salt of the earth. Just that special type of person that isn't hung up with how they're viewed, or no ego that sticks out, that's worried about how they're viewed by other people, and treats others well, embraces kids that were not popular, just easy to be around. Kind of an example for the other boys. All of his friends and his brother and everything just felt like he set an example to follow in terms of how to behave and how to interact with other people. And he enjoyed life. Did the things he liked to do, climb the mountains and play his bass guitar and hang out with his buddies.
And then the day came when he went for a hike that would lead to his crossing over. And we don't need all the details, of course, but there was something fascinating about your interaction with him before he went on the hike that led to his transitioning.
Yeah, I had what I felt was kind of a visitation of some sort, or some presence conveying to me telepathically in my mind, that this is dangerous for Brandon to go on this hike. And I felt like it could even take his life. Then I just thought to myself, you're just being him. And I actually had thought about ways to try and trick him into not going, but I thought, that's too manipulative. He's 18 years old. He goes on these hikes on the mountain all the time. What's different about today? Well, it was different. It was a bad air day. The wind was blowing, and the last thing I said to him, he was about to climb into the car with his buddies to go to the trailhead, was, "Please don't go, Brandon. It's too windy today." And he says, "We're going, Dad."
Yeah.
Just like, "Stop your worrying." And those were the last words he said to me.
As though a foreshadowing, he's going and he's also going.
Hmm.
And we know through 21 decades of afterlife research that we have sort of programmed into our lives different points where we can exit, and some maybe there's some leeway with them, but then there are those ones that they're going
Yeah.
regardless. And do you think that that was part of maybe preparation, or your soul and his soul having a knowing, or what do you think that was?
Well, in hindsight, I think that it was to prepare me so that I would know it was coming. It wasn't an accident. It was something that was part of that plan, as hard as that was to experience. And I say that because of everything that's unfolded since then in such a synchronistic way that's so far beyond chance. Um, that's why I feel that way. I mean, at the time, I probably thought, maybe it was something I was supposed to stop him from doing. but I look at it a bit differently now. Yeah.
I hear that quite often from parents. They'll say, I always knew that this child may not be on the earth for that long, or I had a funny feeling that day. And sometimes they carry guilt or shame with that. And that's when we can just tell them, look, this is your soul getting into preparation for what is, what will be.
He didn't need to be here very long, I think, and I think he was probably here more for us and for this whole thing to happen than anything else. I don't
Say
know that
more about that.
he was a pretty refined soul, in terms of what you would aspire to be as a person, in terms of how you behave, how you live your life. So I'm not trying to say he's perfect. Every parent, it's funny because the kids always become like saintly after they pass to the parent. But I just know what his characteristics were like, and that he, I think, was an old soul. That's a commonly used term, maybe overly used these days, but I think that's what he was and is, an old soul. Um, the other thing about that, just before he passed, it was rather nice. I had been traveling that whole week in California, and I got home Friday night, and usually he would be out, but I went right to his room, and he was in there watching TV, and I gave him a big hug. And then the next morning, I play guitar, he played bass. We got to jam together one last time too. So that was a real nice thing that I was able to have with him before his passing.
And by the way, you have a beautiful song about grief that I want to make sure that I link below for people to hear that you've composed and played. Now, I want to go back a little bit. One would think because you grew up with a father like your dad,
Hmm.
and it might be maybe that you had a strong spiritual nature. You could be as prepared as a human could be for the separation from a child. Were you into the what people call woo-woo at that point?
I think I've always been a pretty level-headed type person and somewhat analytical, but I think I'm balanced. I'm probably more balanced now between right and left brain, and the intuitive side. Um, you know, I guess I'd start by saying I never sought to be the next version of my dad. I always believed and had a spiritual part of my life. I always looked at it as, a spiritual path, but it wasn't like I was, going to church every Sunday or overly focused on that. I actually kind of was more focused on my business path, which you can relate to because you were in the corporate world for a while too. So I was developing my career. I had a young family, and that was kind of, a lot of emphasis put there. But it did change after Brandon passed. I became much more balanced and really took appreciation for what was most important in life, which wasn't work. But work had a place, and I was still going to do a good job and do my best. And even within the work world too, I met a lot of people and helped some of them. And you just think, oh, that's not spiritual, but it can be because you're interacting with people that you don't know or that you do know, and you're helping them along their path as well. I remember we had a meeting one time, and a man from LA was visiting. We had the meeting in Phoenix, and we were out to dinner, and he was telling me how disgusted he was at his son because his son had just gotten his girlfriend pregnant, and blah blah blah. I said, well, I'd trade places with you in a heartbeat, and kind of explain everything to him. And he was like, oh my God. He took inventory of his situation, and then I think a week later or so, he comes back to me. He says, Mark, I have to thank you. He says, I reached out to my son. We had a really good talk, and we're in a really good place now. And I would not have done that if I hadn't talked to you and kind of reevaluated my perspective of the whole situation.
So when did you first seek a medium?
Let me think. I guess the very first thing that happened was my uncle. So my dad had passed by this point in time, but the day that Brandon had passed, I called my uncle. And he said, is there anything I can do for you? I said, well, if you get a message of any kind, I'd really appreciate it. And it was 3 days later, I was in the mortuary, and we connected by cell phone. And he said, hey, Mark, I just wanted to let you know, I tried to connect last night and I couldn't get anything. But this morning I was doing my morning meditation, and your dad came to me, and he wanted you to know that he was there for Brandon when Brandon transitioned. Brendan was a little confused at first as to what was happening, but then your dad helped him understand and adjust. He said Brandon wanted you to know you're the best parents he ever could have had. And then he shared the evidence, which he said, your dad said Brandon's death was caused by a lack of oxygen that causes heart to fail, a lack of oxygen in his bloodstream that causes heart to fail. We didn't know the cause of death at the time. And then 2 days later, the autopsy results were revealed to me in a phone call from the physician who conducted that. And she said, "Oh, your son's death was caused by a severe asthma attack that drove his blood oxygen levels down, causing cardiac arrest." So my uncle was really the first, life raft that I had during that. And I also had my own experience where I wanted a direct connection in just the first few days. So I went into a darkened closet, a walk-in closet, shut the door, and just tried to quietly meditate. And within a little short period of time, I saw an image of him scrolling across, like my forehead's a projector screen, and he was smiling, and I felt glowing like joy. I thought, oh, that's awesome. But then I got something else after that, and after his face scrolled across, I saw a cross with an oval loop at the top. And I'd seen people wear those, but I didn't really know what it was. I never really looked into it. So then I had to go Google it and look up it's Ankh, which is the oldest cross of human history from the ancient Egyptians, the lower portion depicting physical life, and the oval loop, eternal life. Yep. Yep.
I'm wearing one right now from Egypt.
Yep. So I got a coded message, I felt, that was saying he's in eternal life and he's joyful. And
Yeah.
if I had already known what that symbol meant, it wouldn't have meant as much to me because of that analytical side of me, But when looking it up and finding out, okay, you saw this first and now here's what it means, it really meant a lot.
Right. You can't confabulate something you don't know about.
Right. And then I'm trying to think. There was a few readings that I ended up getting. I think the first one was actually with Alison Dubois before she hit it big because of the show Medium. So 3 weeks after Brandon passed, I'm watching the news there in Phoenix on Channel 12, the NBC affiliate, and they're showing about this research being done at the University of Arizona at the time on mediums under controlled conditions, blinded. And lo and behold, Allison was the test medium, and she was giving a reading for sitters she could not see or communicate directly with. And it was about their deceased loved one and all this stuff that person that he liked to do and his favorite food and that he liked to go to Vegas, he liked to play craps or some gambling game and all this. And then they debrief with the sitters afterwards, and it was right on the money. And I thought, wow, I was really impressed with her. I'd love to get a reading from her, and I'd love to be in that lab someday. And later, both things happened. In fact, the very next day, I've told this so many times, but I don't know who's seen the podcast before or not. But the next day, I got a call from Jerry Conser. He was a friend of my father's who lived in Dallas, Texas, and he says, "Hey, Mark, I know what you've been through. I know someone who might be able to help you. Her name's Alison Dubois, and here's a phone number you can call to get a reading." So that was pretty synchronistic. I felt like my dad had a hand in that. But she was even then very, very popular, even before the show Medium had come out. So I had to wait till August to get that reading. But that was I think the first one that I had a series, Linda Williamson in England, and then I was in the lab at the U of A with Lori Campbell. She's also an excellent medium. And then I had Jamie Clark in there last, who Jamie. So those are parts of the book and kind of go through those experiences. But I think I've just been blessed in a way to not only have to meet so many good mediums that have that, but have my own personal experiences and like direct forms of connection. Like my wife saw Brandon at the foot of our bed through her peripheral vision as a shadow figure, and the next day we get a call from a friend in a recording studio to whom we'd loaned Brandon's bass guitar, reporting the same exact thing. I saw a shadow figure out of my peripheral vision and flashes of white light. So we had a visitation. I've had, a dream that was so real it was beyond this reality with Brandon. So we've had a lot of experiences, and it is very helpful.
Well, very early at the beginning of the year in 2010, I had just moved here from Florida and I quit my corporate life. And I was looking for some office space to rent and do my medium stuff. And I walked into a yoga studio where she had a room for rent. and she wanted to test me. And I realized at that point she didn't understand mediumship because she wanted me to read a photo. That's psychic. That's
Mhm.
picking up energy or psychometrizing, an object and then all of that. But what happened was she gave me a picture of Elizabeth Boisson's three children from a Christmas card that had come to the yoga studio. And I thought, okay, well, as I'm going to explain to her, this is psychic, not mediumship. One of the people in that photo came in, and it was Elizabeth's son, Morgan. I didn't know any of these people at all, never heard of any of them, but he started giving details about himself, his life, his passing. And the owner of the yoga studio wrote them all down, called Elizabeth Boisson and told her. And of course, she wanted to meet with me right away. Next thing that happened, it's like all these things in life happen. We still got to live our physical, worldly lives. My husband at the time got very ill. And so I had to, he was going to be fine, but I didn't want to leave him. And I had to put off Elizabeth when she wanted to meet with me. Because if some yoga studio lady where you go and do yoga calls you and says there was this medium here who said your son showed up, and I can't verify all this stuff she told me. And Elizabeth says, well, I can. That all makes sense. She wants to meet with me, but I haven't met with her yet. My husband starts feeling better. I have such cabin fever. I want to get out. Something told me, go look on the internet at workshops and programs. And I ended up at your workshop with wonderful, great guy medium Jamie Clark. And you were talking about your new book, then Soul Shift. And
This
Jamie was
one,
doing
yeah.
readings. Yep, they're your first of three. That was the first one. And Jamie's doing psychometry and readings. You're talking about the book. And I'm starting to feel there's a real parallel here because Elizabeth, who I knew I was going to meet with, her son passed at the base camp of Mount Everest, and your son passed here in the mountains in Arizona. And I thought, this can't be coincidence. So I watched your program. Do you want to take the story from here?
Yeah, you just came up to me during a break, I remember, and first you wanted to, I guess, show me that you were legit. So you said, I just moved here from Florida. I came to this workshop because I wanted to meet like-minded people because I'm new here. She said, and you said, I'm already a medium. And what I was presenting was my dad's material on psychic development, and then Jamie was demonstrating. But anyhow, then you said, well, your uncle's here, and he says something about you got the same, your feet look like your father's. And it was funny because I think it was earlier that day or the day before, I was looking down at my feet. I thought, my feet look like my father's. So it was just a funny thing. But then you said, I've met this other woman whose son passed on a mountain. I thought that was rather, you didn't say coincidental, but it was, a synchronistic kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? Why don't you give her a copy of my book? So I handed you a book and I had my contact information on a card. I said, maybe this will help her. And then you had delivered it, whether it was directly or through the yoga studio person, I don't know. I mean, the landlord of that building. And so I got a call like quickly from Elizabeth. It was just a matter of days. And she says, hi, Mark. My name's Elizabeth Boyson, and I got your book. I loved it. I read it in 1 day or 2 days. I can't remember. It was like super fast. She goes, I want to meet you and your wife. So I'm like, okay. So we got together within a week or so, chatted, and she told me about Morgan. And she says, I've started this Facebook group called Parents United in Loss, and we've never had an in-person meeting, but I'm going to have my first one in 2 weeks. And I'd like you to be my guest speaker. Would you do that? And I'm like, sure. So anyhow, I go and I speak to her first meeting group. There's probably 30, 40 people there. And some of those original people stuck with the organization are still part of it today and are actually board members. So then she started having meetings like once a month, and I would go to some, but not all. And, it was doing really well. Well, fast forward to late 2011, and I was talking to Tina Powers, another friend of mine, another good medium out of Tucson. And she says, hey, Mark, I think your real mission in life is to help other parents who've been through the same thing you have. So maybe you should think about starting an organization to do that. So I contemplated it and I thought, there's no sense in reinventing the wheel because Elizabeth already has something that works, but it's only one group in one location, and she doesn't have a website, doesn't have a newsletter. So I called her and I said, "Hey, Tina's encouraging me to do this. Would you have any interest in expanding this out, to where I'll help you build a website, I'll help you put a newsletter together, and we'll blueprint what you do in your meetings so that other cities, other people in other cities can do the same thing." And she goes, "Oh, that'd be great. Yes, I'd love to." And I said, "Maybe a new name too, like Helping Parents Heal." And she goes, "Oh, I love that name. I didn't like Parents United in Loss. It seemed like a downer." So anyhow, that was really how it started. I can't say it, it took off like an avalanche right away, but we got a few locations going. We got the website up and all that. But eventually, once it caught steam, it's just grown like crazy. And now I think we have about 35,000 members. We have 170 odd affiliate chapters worldwide. We're all over the world now. And we have a conference every other year that draws 1,100 people, which is the capacity of the resort that we have it in. So it's really taken off in a big way.
And then
And
the next conference, do you want to give the date?
well, I don't have the exact date, but I know it'll be
Okay.
August of 26. So basically a year
Okay.
from now.
Yeah.
And so people that are interested, you'll want to, just go to the website and check. I think it's around the first of the year that registration will be open. So it's helpingparentsheal.org is the address for
And
those
it
people.
sells out quickly.
It
But
does.
if you're
Yeah.
hearing this and you just go check anyway, because you can see all the newsletters, you can see hundreds of online meetings that are free that you can attend. I mean, the programs that are put together are really amazing.
It's sad that people need us, but it's good that we're there for them, when they experience a passing of a
Well,
child.
tell us about the mission and what sets Helping Parents Heal apart from perhaps many of the grief groups that folks have heard about or tried.
Yeah, the reason we exist really is because there were no other grief groups for parents that would allow the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence. And we do. That's not all we do, but it's a cornerstone that is it's kind of the hope element, of the healing process from grief. You've got, you can have therapy, you can have all these other things, but that hope element is huge. And so we have that. So like at our conference, we will have some mediums that do readings for groups and things like that, but we'll also have therapists and we'll have people who've had NDEs, near-death experiences, talk about their situations, their what they've experienced in those cases. So it's a well balanced program, but that is what differentiates us, and I think that's why we've exploded like we have because that's what people want. They want to talk about those things if they had a sign or they felt they had a visitation or even an experience with a medium. They want to share that with other people, and we don't shut them up. We let them we let them share that.
Tell us about Your Psychic Potential, the book.
Okay, so I mentioned that reading I had with Alison Dubois, that was in August of 2004. And 2 weeks before that, there was a gentleman who knew my dad who gave me a box. And inside the box was a typewritten manuscript of 8.5 by 11 pages. And it said, Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development by Dr. Richard Ireland, dated 1973. And I'm like, what's this? He goes, well, it's a book that your dad gave me for safekeeping before he passed. I said, well, I that's been 12 years ago. Why are you giving this to me now? He goes, I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to. So 2 weeks later, I have the reading with Allison. One of the first things she says to me is, well, your dad's showing me a book, but I believe it's his book, but he's handing it to you to take forward. Does that make sense to you? And I'm like, yeah, I get it. So anyhow, I took that and went to my publisher and got it published in 2011. And that's what it looks like. So it's basically uh, what it says it is. It's a guide for people who want to work on developing psychic and mediumship phenomenon. I think the way it was really compiled was he was doing ESP workshops back in the late 60s and early 70s. And then he had a friend named Fred Han, who's since passed. And Fred sat through everything and took all the stuff my dad was teaching and recording it down into paragraph format. So he was sort of a ghostwriter. It was all my dad's material, but the two of them worked together on putting it together into book form. And that's how that book came to be.
Have you written two more books or one more book?
So Soul Shift was my first book. That's this one. And then
Right.
most recently, um, The Persistence of the Soul.
And there's messages from the afterlife before that.
So Messages from the Afterlife went out of print. So I got a new publisher, Intertraditions Bear and Company on the East Coast in Vermont. They wanted to bring it back to life. So what we did was we updated it, re-edited it, added new content, and reissued it under the name The Persistence of the Soul. And I think it's a better book
Oh,
now too.
okay.
Messages from the Afterlife, I thought was a little discombobulated in terms of the flow. So we corrected
Okay.
that. We added more content, updated things. So even if somebody had read that other book, they're getting more content now in this one. So, and I'd say the biggest difference is Soul Shift was really a memoir of my personal experiences, and it does include, information on the research and the science piece. But this one's a deep dive. It still has the personal stories. Um, and but in addition to that, it has the research supporting the stories. So for those that are maybe a little more science minded or want to dig deeper and understand the field to a greater degree, or a little more skeptical, that book might be for them. I think Soul Shift is more for the people that just want the stories and they feel good. And there's compelling evidence in both of them. I found two different audiences, that one appeals to more the touchy-feely audience and one more the skeptical or science-minded audience.
So they make a good set then. They complement each other.
I think so, and there's a chronological flow too.
What do you see as the future in terms of maybe artificial intelligence or new instrumental transcommunication tools coming in? Do you guys get involved in that as an organization? Is it an area of research for you? What have you been thinking?
I actually have gotten involved with a few kind of research projects. There's one we're trying to crack a code with the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies on an experiment left behind by Ian Stevenson. We haven't had success yet, but we're still working on it. We're not done yet. There's a few things lined up to try and do that, but I've not really gotten into the ITC world. I don't know what to think of it because I haven't, I guess, learned enough about it or seen the compelling evidence that may be out there to support it. AI is a different animal. That's kind of interesting. Right now, I mean, really, it's a computer program, is what AI is. Very sophisticated, uses a lot of uh, computing power to work, but it also relies on everything published by humans to access the data that it derives from. So it's probably limited by that, at least at this point. If it get to the point where it could start making analysis or determinations that are beyond human comprehension, that would be interesting. Um, I know there's a podcast called Skeptico with a KO. Alex Tsakiris runs it. I've been on it a few times. He's a friend of mine. And it's not a skeptic show, it's really about open minded skepticism. But he did a lot of episodes on AI and asking it different questions, the various platforms too, like to determine like near death experiences, are these real, and mediumship. And he was just getting conflicting answers based on how he posed questions. And he also found that AI wants to make you happy, so you'll spend more on it too. So
Yeah.
at this stage, it seems more like a commercial kind of thing to me. It may have some value. But I've heard of people getting hooked on it too, like almost like it's so real to them. It's like they get lost in this kind of uh, unreal world of
Yeah,
AI.
I've talked about my concerns publicly before. I had a client some years ago who had paid a company, and it was in beta where his deceased son was supposedly going to communicate through AI, and they uploaded every email, everything they had about his son. And it was supposed to be therapeutic. The company had great intentions. It's going to be therapeutic. You see your therapist, you talk things through with the AI, you talk things through with the therapist. But he took it to a whole nother level, and this thing was creating new content. It was saying, this is what I'm doing now, on the other side, and those sorts of things. And I'm like, ah. And he rightfully put the brakes on. And I thought, man, this thing's going to just bust wide open. And here it is. So we do have people thinking that they're connecting with the loved one on the other side. And you know what? I want somebody to work on this. I want to see, what comes down the pike. But I've always had tremendous pressure to be an evidential medium. So of course I want show me the evidence, but I think it's going to be really interesting. And I do think your organization is going to have to really start developing information or a viewpoint or something, along those lines, but there's no rush. I would say in the next 5 years, so much is going to change. Whatever your research shows you now is going to be completely different.
It has actually crossed my mind, and I actually thought about writing a fiction book with the premise of a spirit actually using not AI, but maybe, I guess, some robotic or artificial type intelligence to communicate. Whether that's actually feasible, I don't know. I mean, you're a medium, you know how you get information. I've had some mediumship myself directly that I've experienced, so I kind of know what it feels like, even though I don't do it all the time. At least for me, it's been a couple of primary things, but it's like either an image comes in and then I state what I'm seeing, and then it turns out to be relevant, or sometimes it's a feeling, um, an energetic feeling, or something that steers me to how maybe the person past felt or something like that. And I don't know, I guess everybody gets information in a different manner, a different way. So how would a mechanical device get that? It's very subtle. At least I found it to be subtle when it's worked for
It
me.
doesn't have a soul.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so if it's a soul to soul energetic connection, then maybe it just can't work. I don't know.
But it's going to be useful. We have to figure out in what ways it's
Yeah.
going to be useful. I mean, it seems to have a built-in confirmation bias because, as you said, and Alex has said, it's designed to make us happy, lift us up, and pretty much not say no to our
Yeah.
ideas. So it's just a fascinating time to be here, Mark Ireland.
It is. It's interesting, and I know there's a lot of people afraid of AI, thinking, it's going to take over the
Oh,
world or whatever, but,
no.
it's not like it's the robotics, would be the fear part, I guess, to have, an army of robots or whatever, or that it could screw up our systems in some way. If, the wrong people were sending out that AI programming or something, but I think, like you said, it could do a lot of good. In fact, it could get to the truths that seem to be hidden or mainstream academia will not support just because they're,
Yes.
just like all the phenomena we talk about. But maybe AI gets to the point where it's like, hey, here's the evidence, it's here, it's real. This is an actual thing, as opposed to this denial, never-ending denial of all things. I don't even want to use the term paranormal because I think it's normal. It's just outside the bounds of materialistic science.
I've got a big question for you, but before I do that, how do people find you?
Just markirelandauthor.com. It's a string of letters. Mark with a K, Ireland like the country, author.com. Markirelandauthor.com. I said it 3 times because I used to be in advertising. They'd say, you have to repeat something 3 times for it to sink in. So there they could find my books. I've got a media page with a lot of other interviews I've done. I've got a clip from when I was on the Discovery Channel with that lab experiment at the U of A. I've got a short documentary there done by some Arizona State University journalism students a number of years ago. Just a variety of things on the media page. I've got links to other resources. I've got a link to my dad's website and his videos, like the Steve Allen videos that you mentioned, a link to Helping Parents Heal, and I've got a certified medium site too. There's a link to that as well.
So the last question, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh boy, as someone who helped other people, someone who helped uplift or did my best to uplift other people and give them hope.
Mark Ireland, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thanks for having me. It was great talking to you today.
Visit our website, carefreemedium.com, or find us on social media at Carefree Medium. Thanks for supporting Carefree and Conscious.